August 1994. Dallas, Texas. The air thick with humidity and anticipation. Two guitar gods were about to collide in a way that would create ripples through rock history for decades to come. The world knew Ace Frehley as the Space Ace, the silver-painted icon who helped define arena rock in the 70s. They knew Dimebag Darrell as the groove metal revolutionary who was reshaping heavy music with Pantera. But what nobody knew was that in less than 6 hours, these two legends would face each other in a confrontation that would leave one of them speechless, the other haunted, and an entire backstage crew sworn to silence. The Monsters of Rock Festival that year was more than just a concert. It was a generational crossover, a moment where the old guard of rock royalty would share oxygen with the new breed of metal warriors. Ace Frehley, now solo and carrying the weight of Kiss legacy on his shoulders, was there representing an era when rock meant theatrical grandeur and stadium-filling spectacle. Pantera, with Dimebag Darrell's devastating riffs leading the charge, represented the raw, unfiltered aggression of 90s metal. On paper, these two worlds should have coexisted peacefully for one night. But rock and roll has never been about what should happen. Before we dive deeper into this story, if you want to discover more untold secrets from rock history, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. The day started innocuously enough. Ace arrived at the venue around noon, his tour bus pulling into the artist compound, with the quiet efficiency of a man who had done this thousands of times before. At 53 years old, Ace was in a transitional phase of his career. The Kiss reunion everyone was clamoring for hadn't happened yet. His solo work was respected, but not selling like the old days. He was fighting to prove that Ace Frehley, without the makeup, without Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley flanking him, was still relevant in a musical landscape that had dramatically shifted since his glory days. There was a chip on his shoulder, though he'd never admit it publicly. Every festival appearance was both a victory lap and a test. A reminder that he had to earn his place among younger, hungrier musicians who hadn't even been born when Kiss was selling out arenas. Dimebag Darrell Abbott, on the other hand, arrived like a force of nature. 29 years old, at the absolute peak of his powers, riding high on Pantera's Far Beyond Driven album, which had debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts earlier that year. This was no small feat for a band as heavy and uncompromising as Pantera. Dimebag was more than just Pantera's guitarist. He was becoming the guitar hero for a generation that had rejected the hair metal excess of the 80s in favor of something darker, heavier, more authentic. His tone was crushing, his stage presence was magnetic, and his confidence was unshakable. Where Ace represented the past, Dimebag embodied the present. And in the cruel arithmetic of rock and roll, the present always seems more vital than history. The backstage area at these mega festivals is its own universe, a temporary city of trailers, tents, and green rooms where egos, insecurities, and ambitions collide as violently as the music being played on stage. There's an unspoken hierarchy, a pecking order determined by chart positions, album sales, and cultural relevance. Ace, as a founding father of theatrical rock, commanded respect. But Pantera was the current kings, and everyone knew it. The production crew knew it, the promoters knew it, and most importantly, the other bands knew it. Around 4 in the afternoon, both camps found themselves in the same catering area. This is where the myth and the reality start to blur, where eyewitness accounts begin to diverge, where the truth gets obscured by 20 years of retelling and exaggeration. But multiple sources who were present that day, from sound engineers to security personnel to members of other bands, confirm the basic framework of what happened next. Ace was sitting at a corner table with his road manager and a guitar tech, nursing a cup of coffee and reviewing the night's set list. Dimebag entered with his usual entourage, the Pantera crew, a rolling party wherever they went, loud and unapologetic. What happened next depends on who you ask. Some say Dimebag approached Ace's table deliberately. Others insist it was a coincidental crossing of paths, but everyone agrees on what came next. Dimebag, never one to shy away from speaking his mind, particularly after a few drinks, made a comment. The exact wording has been debated endlessly. Some versions have him saying, "Hey Ace, how's it feel playing guitar that's older than most people here?" Others claim he said something about Ace's sound being outdated, a relic from a bygone era. The most commonly cited version, corroborated by at least 3 independent witnesses, was this: "Your guitar tone is museum stuff, man. That whole vintage thing, it's dead." Music moved on. For most people, this might have been brushed off as the thoughtless bravado of youth, the kind of comment that gets made and forgotten in the chaos of festival life. But Ace Frehley wasn't most people. He had spent the better part of 2 decades watching the music industry evolve past him, watching younger guitarists claim the throne he had helped build. He had endured the humiliation of being pushed out of Kiss, the struggles of addiction, the financial troubles, the constant question of whether he still mattered. Dimebag's comment, intentional or not, landed on a bruise that had never fully healed. The room didn't go silent. This isn't a movie. Life doesn't provide dramatic pauses on cue. The catering area continued its background hum of conversations and clinking dishes, but the people closest to that table noticed the shift. Ace stood up slowly, his 6-foot frame unfolding with deliberate calm. His road manager later described the look on Ace's face as dangerously neutral, the expression of a man who had learned through decades of rock and roll warfare how to control his immediate reactions. Ace walked over to where Dimebag was standing, close enough that only Darrell and maybe 1 or 2 others could hear what was said next. This is where the story becomes legend. This is the moment that has been whispered about in green rooms and tour buses for 3 decades. Ace leaned in and spoke directly into Dimebag's ear, his voice low enough that no recording device caught it, no journalist documented it, no second-hand account can claim certainty. What he said lasted maybe 10 seconds. When he pulled back, Dimebag's face had changed completely. The swagger was gone. The cocky grin had evaporated. Multiple witnesses describe him as going pale, his eyes widening, his entire body language shifting from confident to shaken. For years, speculation ran wild. What could Ace Frehley possibly have said to rattle one of metal's most fearless figures? Theories ranged from the mundane to the supernatural. Some claimed Ace threatened him physically. Others suggested he revealed something about Dimebag's personal life, some secret that would have destroyed him if made public. The more superstitious corners of rock fandom even proposed that Ace, with his Space Ace mystique, had cursed Dimebag somehow, speaking words that carried dark power. The truth, as is often the case, is both simpler and more profound than the mythology. And it remained hidden until December 7th, 2004, 3 days before Dimebag Darrell was murdered on stage in Columbus, Ohio. In those final days of his life, Dimebag was reflective, perhaps sensing something, perhaps just at a point where old secrets felt less important to keep. He sent an email to a close friend, a fellow musician who has never publicly identified himself, but who shared the contents of that message with a select few. In that email, Dimebag finally revealed what Ace had whispered to him a decade earlier. According to that message, Ace said this: You think I don't know what it's like to be on top? I was playing Madison Square Garden when you were in diapers. I had everything you have now, and I watched it disappear. Not because my guitar tone got old, not because the music moved on, but because I stopped respecting it. I stopped treating this like the gift it is. You're standing here disrespecting me, but you're really disrespecting the music. And the music always, always takes back what it gives. You remember this moment when it happens to you, because it will happen. It happens to everyone who forgets where they came from. When you understand what was actually said, the impact makes perfect sense. Dimebag wasn't shaken by a threat or an insult. He was shaken by prophecy, by recognition, by the sudden vertigo of seeing his own future in Ace Frehley's eyes. Because Ace wasn't angry, he wasn't defending his ego or his legacy. He was delivering a warning from someone who had lived through the complete arc of rock stardom, the ascent, the peak, and the long, humbling descent. The rest of the festival went on without further incident. Both artists performed their sets. Ace delivered his classic catalog with the precision of a craftsman who knew every note mattered. Pantera demolished the stage with the kind of ferocity that reminded everyone why they were the most dangerous band in metal. There was no public acknowledgement of what had happened backstage. No interviews mentioned it. No photographers captured the moment. It existed in that twilight zone of rock and roll lore, the things that happen in the margins, away from the official narrative. But the story didn't end there. Over the next 10 years, people close to Dimebag noticed something. He started talking differently about the older generation of rock musicians. The dismissive attitude that had been typical of his early interviews gave way to something more respectful, more thoughtful. In a 2002 interview, he specifically mentioned Ace Frehley as one of the most underrated guitarists in rock history, praising his melodic sensibility and his contribution to making the guitar a visual instrument as much as a musical one. When asked what changed his perspective, Dimebag just said he'd learned to appreciate history more as he got older. Those who knew about the backstage encounter understood there was more to it. Ace's words had burrowed into Dimebag's consciousness and stayed there. Every time Pantera faced a career challenge, every time the music industry shifted beneath their feet, every time Dimebag saw a younger band disrespecting the traditions they'd built, he thought about that afternoon in Dallas. He thought about Ace Frehley standing there, not with anger, but with the weary wisdom of someone who had already walked the path Dimebag was just beginning to travel. The tragic irony is that Dimebag never got to experience the full arc that Ace had warned him about. He was murdered at 38, at a point where Pantera had broken up, but his legend was still ascending. He never faced the indignity of being considered outdated. He never had to watch a younger generation dismiss his contributions as museum pieces. He was frozen in time, forever young, forever vital, forever at the peak. In the cruelest twist, death gave him the immortality that time would have complicated. Ace Frehley, now in his 70s, has never publicly commented on the encounter. When asked about Dimebag's death in various interviews over the years, he's been respectful but guarded, offering condolences without elaborating. Those close to him say he took Dimebag's murder hard, harder than you might expect for someone he'd only briefly interacted with. Perhaps because Ace saw something of himself in Dimebag, the raw talent, the self-destructive tendencies, the complicated relationship with fame. Perhaps because that backstage moment had meant something to Ace too, a chance to pass on hard-earned wisdom, to be more than just a nostalgia act. The broader truth that emerges from this story is about the nature of artistic legacy and the brutal honesty of time. Ace Frehley's warning to Dimebag wasn't about guitar tones or musical trends. It was about hubris, about the seductive belief that you're special enough to escape the gravity that pulls down everyone who came before you. Rock history is littered with cautionary tales. Artists who believed their moment would last forever, who mocked the previous generation only to find themselves on the receiving end of the same dismissal years later. What makes this encounter particularly poignant is that both men were right in their own way. Dimebag was correct that music evolves, that new sounds replace old ones, that each generation needs to forge its own identity. Ace was correct that talent and success are temporary gifts, that the music industry is ruthlessly efficient at discarding yesterday's heroes, that respect for those who paved the way is not just courtesy, but survival strategy. The tension between these two truths is what drives rock and roll forward, while simultaneously breaking the hearts of those who live it. In the years since, the story has taken on mythological proportions in certain circles. Guitar forums debate what Ace said. Music historians try to verify the details. Younger musicians who never witnessed the moment firsthand tell their own versions, embellished and distorted through countless retellings. But the core truth remains. Two guitar legends, representing different eras and different philosophies, had a moment of raw, unfiltered honesty in a backstage catering area in Dallas. And what passed between them was profound enough to alter how one of them viewed his entire career. The real lesson here isn't about who was the better guitarist or whose era produced superior music. It's about the unavoidable cycle that every artist must face. The understanding that your time on top is borrowed, not owned. Ace Frehley knew this because he'd lived it. He'd been the innovative force behind Kiss's sound, the guitarist who made the Les Paul cool again for a new generation, the guy who proved you could be technically proficient and theatrically bombastic simultaneously. And then he'd watched it all slip away. Not because he got worse, but because the world moved on. Dimebag Darrell was just beginning to understand this in 1994, standing there in shock as an older musician held up a mirror to his future. By 2004, when he wrote that email revealing Ace's words, he understood it completely. Pantera had imploded. The music he'd pioneered was being copied by lesser bands. Younger guitarists were citing him as an influence while simultaneously dismissing his recent work as not heavy enough, not innovative enough. The cycle Ace had warned him about was already in motion. There's a recording that surfaced online several years ago, authenticity disputed but compelling nonetheless. It's allegedly from a Pantera soundcheck in 2003, one of their final shows. Between songs, Dimebag is talking to the sound engineer about guitar tones, and he says something that stops everyone who knows the backstage story cold. I met Ace Frehley once. Didn't really get it at the time. Wish I could talk to him again now. The audio cuts off there, and Dimebag launches into a crushing riff. If it's real, it's the only known instance of Dimebag publicly acknowledging the encounter and its lasting impact on him. What both men shared, beyond their extraordinary talent and their place in guitar history, was an understanding of music as something sacred, something larger than individual careers or generational battles. Ace's warning wasn't born from bitterness or resentment. It came from a place of genuine concern, one artist trying to spare another the pain of learning certain lessons the hard way. Dimebag's eventual embrace of that wisdom wasn't capitulation or admitting defeat. It was maturity, the recognition that honoring the past doesn't diminish the present. The music industry has only accelerated since 1994. The cycles of relevance and obsolescence that used to take decades now happen in years. Guitarists who were innovative last week are derivative today. Albums that defined a moment are forgotten before the tour ends. The mechanisms Ace described to Dimebag, the ways the music takes back what it gives, operate at speeds that would have been unimaginable to earlier generations. But the fundamental truth remains unchanged. Talent is common, success is temporary, and respect for the continuum of musical history is the only real hedge against being completely erased. Standing here decades later, we can see both careers in full relief. Ace Frehley, still performing, still recording, carrying the torch of classic rock into an era that has largely forgotten what arenas looked like in the 70s. Dimebag Darrell, frozen in time, a martyr to the music he loved. His influence growing even as the man himself remains forever 38. Their one meaningful interaction lasted seconds, but it encapsulated the central tension of rock and roll. How do you honor what came before while forging something new? How do you accept your place in the timeline without surrendering to irrelevance? The answer, suggested by both men's careers in different ways, is that you don't fight the cycle. You ride it with as much grace and authenticity as you can muster. You respect those who came before because someday, someone will need to decide whether to respect you. You create art that matters in the moment while understanding the moment is all you're guaranteed. You speak truth to the next generation, even knowing they probably won't understand until it's too late. That's what happened in Dallas in 1994. An older guitarist, scarred by experience, offered truth to a younger one, still bulletproof in his prime. The younger guitarist heard it, but couldn't fully comprehend it. Not yet. By the time he could, by the time life had taught him what Ace's words really meant, there wasn't enough time left to do anything with that knowledge. Except perhaps to pass it on himself, to younger musicians who would make the same mistakes, learn the same lessons, and hopefully remember that somewhere in the chain of rock and roll wisdom, Ace Frehley and Dimebag Darrell shared a moment that mattered. The music always takes back what it gives. Both men knew this truth from different vantage points on the timeline. Both men, in their own way, tried to make peace with it. And both men, whether through longevity or legend, found a form of immortality that transcends hit records and sold-out shows. They became part of the story that every musician eventually joins. The story of talent meeting time, of ego confronting mortality, of the eternal struggle to create something that outlasts the moment of its creation.